Welcome back to our journey through the book of Exodus. In this installment, we continue to witness God's hand at work as he prepares Moses to lead his people to freedom. From the burning bush at Mount Horeb to Pharaoh's courts in Egypt, the story of deliverance unfolds with awe-inspiring power and divine purpose. Let's step back into the pages of history and faith to explore how God's promises unfold. The story of Exodus begins along the mighty Nile, a river that gave life to Egypt's empire and sustained a people enslaved under its shadow. It is a story of bondage and freedom, faith and deliverance. Set in the late Bronze Age, around the 13th or 15th century BCE, the book of Exodus recounts the plight of the Israelites, a people who had grown numerous in the land of Egypt. Oppressed by Pharaoh, their lives were marked by toil and suffering. Yet, amidst this darkness, God's plan for deliverance was taking shape. The land of Goshen, nestled in the Nile Delta, was the home of the Israelites. Once welcomed during Joseph's time, they became a people enslaved, caught between Egyptian power and the promises made to their forefather Abraham. At a time of great oppression, a child was born who would change history. Rescued from death by Pharaoh's daughter and raised in the royal court, Moses would later flee to Midian, where God called him to be the deliverer of his people. In the wilderness of Midian, God revealed himself to Moses in a burning bush, declaring his name, Yahweh I Am. God commissioned Moses to return to Egypt and demand freedom for his people. Exodus is more than a story of escape. It is a testimony to God's faithfulness and power, a declaration that he hears the cries of his people and delivers them. From the 10 plagues to the Red Sea, from Mount Sinai to the wilderness journey, it reveals the God who redeems and calls his people to a covenant relationship. The story of Exodus is both spiritual and historical, rooted in the traditions of the ancient Near East. Archaeological discoveries and cultural practices, like the celebration of Passover, continue to affirm its enduring legacy. The book of Exodus is a cornerstone of Scripture. Its themes of deliverance, covenant, and God's presence remind us that the God who freed his people from Egypt is the same God who works in our lives today. This is the story of freedom. This is the story of Exodus. The book of Exodus opens in Egypt during a time of profound change. The descendants of Jacob, also known as Israel, had settled in the land of Goshen centuries earlier during Joseph's time. Once welcomed as honored guests, they had multiplied and prospered in this fertile region along the Nile. But as their numbers grew, a new Pharaoh, who did not remember Joseph, rose to power. Fearing their strength, he enslaved the Israelites, forcing them to labor in harsh conditions to build cities like Pi-Rames and Pithom. What began as a thriving community was now a people in bondage. To weaken the Israelites and suppress their growth, Pharaoh issued a decree. Every Hebrew male child was to be cast into the Nile River. It was a time of unspeakable cruelty, and the cries of the enslaved reached the heavens. Among the Hebrew families was Jochebed, a mother who defied Pharaoh's order. Placing her infant son in a basket, she entrusted him to the currents of the Nile, praying that God would protect him. God's providence was at work. Pharaoh's daughter found the child and, moved by compassion, adopted him as her own. She named him Moses, meaning drawn out of the water. Raised in Pharaoh's palace, Moses received the education of a prince while retaining his Hebrew identity. As Moses grew, he became increasingly aware of the suffering of his people. One day, seeing an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave, Moses intervened and killed the Egyptian. Fearing Pharaoh's wrath, he fled Egypt and sought refuge in the wilderness of Midian. The Israelites' suffering grew unbearable, and they cried out to God for deliverance. In his faithfulness, God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Their cries set the stage for a story of divine intervention and liberation. From the fertile plains of Egypt to the desolate wilderness of Midian, God's plan was unfolding. Moses, once a prince of Egypt, would soon encounter the divine call that would lead him back to confront Pharaoh and free his people. The journey of deliverance was about to begin. After fleeing Egypt, Moses settled in the land of Midian. There, he found refuge with Jethro, a Midianite priest, and married his daughter Zipporah. For 40 years, Moses lived as a shepherd, tending flocks in the wilderness, far removed from his life as a prince of Egypt. Yet even in this quiet life, God was preparing Moses for a greater purpose, a purpose that would lead him back to Egypt to deliver his people. While tending his flock near Mount Horeb, Moses encountered a sight that defied nature. A bush engulfed in flames but not consumed. As he drew closer, the voice of God called out to him from the fire,
"Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here I am. Do not come near. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground."
God revealed himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, declaring that he had seen the suffering of his people in Egypt and had come to deliver them.
"I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt."
Moses doubted his ability to confront Pharaoh, questioning, "Who am I that I should go?" But God reassured him, promising to be with him and giving him signs to confirm his divine authority. God provided Moses with signs: a staff that turned into a serpent and back again, and a hand temporarily afflicted with leprosy, demonstrating his power to work through Moses.
"I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you."
In this profound moment, God revealed his name, I Am, affirming his eternal, unchanging nature and his authority over all creation.
O Lord, I am not eloquent, but slow of speech and tongue.
Moses expressed his doubts, fearing he was not capable of speaking to Pharaoh. But God reminded him, "Who has made man's mouth? Now go, and I will be with your mouth." To ease Moses' fears, God appointed Aaron, his brother, to speak on his behalf. Together, they would confront Pharaoh and demand the release of the Israelites. Moses, once a fugitive and shepherd, now carried the call of God to free his people. Strengthened by divine assurance, he would face the might of Pharaoh and witness the unfolding of God's power. The journey of deliverance was now in motion. Moses and Aaron stood before Pharaoh in the heart of Egyptian power, declaring the words of Yahweh, "Let my people go, that they may serve me." But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he refused to listen. It was a defiance that would provoke a divine response. The first plague struck the Nile, Egypt's lifeline. The river, which sustained life and worship, turned to blood, rendering its waters undrinkable. Yet Pharaoh remained unmoved. Each plague escalated in intensity. Frogs overtook homes and palaces, gnats swarmed the air, and flies corrupted the land. Egypt's gods were powerless to intervene, and Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. God's judgments extended to Egypt's economy and livelihood. Hail destroyed crops and livestock, while locusts consumed what little remained. The plague struck at the heart of Egypt's reliance on their gods and their belief in Pharaoh's divine authority. For 3 days, a thick darkness engulfed Egypt, a darkness that could be felt, symbolizing God's power over the Egyptian sun god, Ra. Yet Pharaoh's defiance persisted. The 10th and final plague struck at the heart of Pharaoh's power, the death of every firstborn in Egypt. But God spared the Israelites, instructing them to mark their homes with the blood of a lamb and to eat the first Passover meal. It was a night of judgment and deliverance.
"When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you."
This final act broke Pharaoh's resistance. He summoned Moses and Aaron, ordering the Israelites to leave Egypt. The deliverance of God's people was at hand. The Israelites left in haste, taking with them the wealth of Egypt given to them by their neighbors. The Passover marked the beginning of their liberation, a moment that would be celebrated for generations. The 10 plagues of Egypt revealed God's power over all creation, his justice against oppression, and his mercy for those who trust in him. As the Israelites began their journey, they carried with them the hope of God's promises and the legacy of deliverance. After 400 years of bondage, the Israelites departed Egypt. They carried not only their belongings, but also the spoils of Egypt, given by their neighbors. Led by Moses, the journey was guided by the presence of God, a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, a constant reminder of his protection and promise. Pharaoh's heart hardened once more, and he pursued the Israelites with his mighty army. Trapped between the sea and their oppressors, the people cried out to Moses, but God was about to reveal his power. At God's command, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the waters divided. The Israelites walked through on dry ground, surrounded by walls of water, a miracle that displayed God's sovereignty over creation. When the Egyptian army pursued, the waters returned, consuming Pharaoh's forces. Not one survived. On the other shore, the Israelites sang a song of praise, declaring, "The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation." The wilderness was a place of testing and provision. When the people faced hunger and thirst, God provided manna from heaven and water from a rock, teaching them to trust in his daily care. At Mount Sinai, God made a covenant with Israel. The mountain trembled as his presence descended in fire and smoke. There, he gave them his law, the 10 Commandments, shaping them into a holy nation and setting them apart for his purpose. Through the 10 Commandments, God revealed his character and his will for his people. This covenant established Israel as a nation uniquely devoted to him. God's presence dwelled among his people in the tabernacle, a sacred tent that symbolized his nearness and his holiness. Every detail, from the Ark of the Covenant to the altar of incense, pointed to God's plan of redemption. The journey to freedom was not without trials, but God's faithfulness never wavered. From the Red Sea to Mount Sinai, he revealed his power, his provision, and his presence, leading his people toward the promised land. Exodus is not just a story of deliverance. It is a testimony to God's faithfulness, a reminder that he hears the cries of his people and acts in his perfect timing. Through trials and triumphs, he revealed his power and his unwavering covenant. Through the annual observance of Passover, the story of Exodus continues to resonate. Families gather to remember how God delivered his people from bondage and to celebrate his enduring promises. The promised land, Jerusalem and its surrounding hills, became a symbol of hope and fulfillment. For the Israelites, it marked the culmination of God's covenant. For the world, it remains a testament to his redemptive plan. The events of Exodus are deeply rooted in history. Archaeological discoveries continue to shed light on the journey of the Israelites and the world they inhabited. These findings affirm the cultural and historical backdrop of this monumental story. The story of Exodus transcends time and culture. It calls each of us to reflect on God's faithfulness, to find freedom in his promises, and to trust in his plan of redemption for all humanity. It is a story that reminds us of who God is and who we are meant to be. Exodus is a timeless reminder that God is not distant. He is present, faithful, and powerful to deliver, from the bondage of Egypt to the hope of the promised land. This story points us to the ultimate deliverer and his eternal covenant with humanity.
Thank you for joining the time traveler on this journey through history. If you found this story moving, insightful, or worth remembering, please take a moment to support the channel by clicking the like button. It helps more people discover these important stories. And if you'd like to see more documentaries like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Together, we can keep these stories alive for future generations. Your support means the world. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.